In the year 9 BCE, about 5 years before we think Jesus was actually born, a Roman decree was inscribed in stone in an ancient city in western Turkey called Priene. Inscriptions in stone were one way news traveled in the ancient world. You might imagine a very slow early form of Twitter. This newsflash was known as the Priene inscription, and it celebrated, stone by stone by stone, the birthday of the new emperor of Rome, Caesar Augustus. It described Augustus's birthday as the beginning of the good news for the world. This Augustus, who was called God and Savior, as the Caesars were, is proclaimed as good news for the world because he has ended war and arranged all things. That puts some things in perspective. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Imagine for a moment that you lived in Jewish Palestine under Roman rule. The God of Rome has just told you that he wants to know your name, where you live, and where your family is from. The God of Rome needs this information so that he can keep the peace, so that he can collect your taxes and pay for your defense. You will comply. So, Luke tells us all went to their own towns to be registered. Like pawns being moved around a chessboard, the people of the hill towns of Galilee and Judea took to the roads. Among the thousands trudging along the highways and byways of Palestine, far from Rome, Mary and Joseph walked and walked until they came to Bethlehem. Once the great city of King David, but now just a small backwater town in the shadow of Jerusalem. Now, it is quite possible that this mass migration of people for a census didn't happen in exactly this way. Luke might have been taking some liberties with the historical record. But in his defense, Luke was not a modern historian. Luke was more interested in telling a different kind of story. A story that might not have been accurate in every factual detail, but was deadly accurate in the much larger truth that he was trying to convey. Truth about the things that really matter. Things like how empires work and how God chose to be born in our midst in the form of the most vulnerable package possible, a tiny infant. What Luke got right about this census is that empires have always wanted to count people. From our earliest historical records in the Bible and many other places, we know that empires, rulers have used a census as a tool throughout the ages to support their reign. Rulers count people so they can tax them and so they can conscript them into military service or other work projects. And today, sometimes census can be used for more benign and even beneficial things, like how many schools need to be built and what kind of social services we need to provide. But there's something off about all this counting. You see, no matter how much or how often rulers and governments count people, in the end, it always turns out that some people don't really count much after all. You see, even today, it's possible to be counted, but not to count. In our political economy, only those with wealth, power, connections, or celebrity seem to count for much. The hard news is that millions, or really billions, of people throughout the globe are actually not treated as though their governments or societies think they count for much. Because if all of our societies and governments believed that everyone mattered equally, the world would be a very different place. But into this world, this kind of world where people can be counted in order to be exploited, but not count for much, God intervened decisively. God intervened in order not just to send a message, but to bring God's own self into this world in a tiny, vulnerable, seemingly helpless way. And that gift of God's self came with a name. He was called Jesus, which means God saves. And Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Here's how Luke tells it once again. In that region, there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of a great joy, which shall be to all the people. For to you this day is born in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord." Do you hear God's answer to the presumptions of Augustus Caesar? To you, the angels proclaim, is born a Savior. To you. Not just to all the people, not just to the world in general, not just to the ruling classes or those who can buy access, but to you. For you. For you is born God in the world. And that good news can be boiled down finally to this. You count. Every one of you. You count. No matter what the world says or what your family told you or how much is in your bank account or how many friends or loved ones you can count or whether you have a place to be tomorrow, you count. No matter anything, you count. You count because you are God's child, beloved by God beyond what you can know. And the meaning of Christmas is that God took on our human condition to make sure you know this truth. Lutheran scholar David Lose has said, Luke wants to make sure that we realize it's not just human flesh in general that God takes on in Christ. It's our flesh. And it's not simply history in general into which God comes. It is our history now, our lives to which God is committed. So know this, God is committed to you, even to your very flesh, and to the flesh of the ones you love. It's a commitment that began long before you were born and will continue beyond your death. And this is not just a story of long ago and far away, but a story of here and now. For as tonight we kneel in our hearts before a baby filled with God, we are all called to be filled with Christ. We are called to bear the love of Christ into the world tonight and tomorrow and every day we have the luxury of taking breath, to make sure that everyone knows they count, each person, one by one by one. That's how God bends the arc of the universe towards true peace and justice and a love that will prevail. So go from here tonight with that inextinguishable light that no one can take from you and be in your flesh the good news of Christmas.